right. Why don't you tell us who you are and what you do?
So my name is Michael Hicks, and I'm an independent game designer and musician. I do other things as well. I'm part of a two-man team. We've released some games on PS4, Xbox One, and Steam. The first one that we did was called Pillar. The second one was called The Path of Modus. And like I said, we're a two-man team, so I handle like marketing and promotion, things like that. Basically everything but the art. So maybe that's a little different from people that do AAA work. So
How long have you been doing DIY?
So professionally, I started doing this in 2011. I released some Xbox 360 games on the indie channel on there. Before that, I was making games as a hobby. In grade school, I learned a programming language called Blitz Plus and just did some little hobby small games, and I just kind of built it up throughout the years. I've been doing this full-time since 2013. After I graduated Full Sail, that's when we did the two big games, Pillar and Path of Modus. So, yeah.
Awesome. Tell us a bit about Path of Modus.
Sure, yeah. So the Path of Modus is a game where your words can destroy people. Modus is the character you play as, and he's a goblin that's been trapped in a forest for hundreds of years. No one's found a way out, but he thinks he'll be the first one to get through by building bridges through the forest. So there's some puzzle elements where you're building bridges. But in between doing that, he meets bullies that use their words to destroy him. So there's like a verbal combat system. The people shout words, and you have different words you can match with. And the combat kind of becomes more puzzly as you go along. It's kind of about changing your perspective. I don't want to spoil too much. But yeah, I like puzzle. Right. Well, my last 2 years have been puzzle design or puzzle based. I really like games that make you think about things and maybe a little more slower paced. So.
Nice. So, like, what does being a game developer designer mean to you?
Well, I think it's about creating systems that are interesting. This sounds kind of vague, I guess, but that's how I think of it. Like, games are systems, and I like to make interactions that are interesting and kind of express certain ideas. If I could, it'd be cool if you could like mimic life. Well, so some people actually think we're living in a simulation, right? So I kind of, those types of philosophies is how I approach my games. Like, I'm taking a chunk of real life systems and kind of doing a not fully realistic version, but taking a chunk of life to express certain ideas. I'm not sure if that's making sense, but I'm all about like the interactions in the games that I design. That's how I'm trying to convey certain ideas or messages, by interacting with the systems. So I feel like that was kind of a bloated response, but hopefully it makes sense. The example I like to give that usually clarifies what I'm saying is like, if you ever played Monopoly, the board game, like the lady who designed that, she was trying to make like a political statement through the rules of play, and that's what I'm trying to do as well. And most people have played Monopoly, so maybe that's a good example of what I try to do. So.
Your games are much more fun than Monopoly.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
So how do you handle narrative in your games at all?
So when I first started doing Pillar, I was really anti-narrative. So I was like, we need to get away from that and focus on the gameplay. So I started off like really anti-narrative, but it's funny because I feel like all of my games, even that one, are very story. Like, there's a narrative there, but I'm not approaching narrative in the traditional sense. Like, it's not structured like a book or anything, right? Like in the Path of Modus, I brought back in narrative, but I don't feel like it's structured like a traditional story. It's like bits and pieces of dialogue or ideas that help the player have context for what the gameplay is trying to say. So an example of that would be in the Path of Modus, you have these puzzles that are on doors in different side areas, and I designed those to express like what Modus is feeling at that specific point in the story. And so, for example, in the cave section, that's the first section you find in the cave, you find a poem about Modus feeling like isolated from the world, and those puzzles on that door, they're designed in a way where you intuitively want to isolate them off, but then players realize, oh, I can't be isolated, everything has to be connected, and it kind of links back to the poem. Before in Pillar, I was doing stuff like that, but there was no narrative context, so like some people got it, some people didn't. So I kind of changed my approach in Modus to be, like I said, using the narrative to give context to the gameplay, if that makes sense. Okay.
Have you ever had to change a narrative idea because of the mechanics that were in place?
Yeah, it goes back and forth. Like, that's been my struggle for making these types of games, is I find that, I'm trying to make a game that's engaging and fun, but then sometimes what the more engaging and fun thing is isn't what fits with what the story or the ideas are that I'm trying to express, and there's like this kind of back and forth conflict, and it goes both ways. So I've struggled with that for sure. I mean, maybe I'll get better with that as I make more games, but it's definitely a challenge in everything I do. Yeah.
So, what are some really good free resources for like upstart game developers, designers, and stuff that you've come across?
So there's a ton of stuff that I found on YouTube, but like there's all types of resources. I actually have my own YouTube channel. People can reach it by going to pathofmodus.com, and I have a whole bunch of different videos. Some of them are more just like, hey, here's what I've done in my career so far, just kind of sharing my path. Others are more technical, like I have some programming videos if people aren't from a coding background. I even talk about like marketing and things like that. So you can go to my YouTube channel, but there's a ton of other stuff as well. I know Unity, they have a lot of stuff right on their website for educational resources. But yeah, I think that's a good start.
So how much communication did you have with like other disciplines of making games, like artists and sound designers and stuff like that?
Do you mean like for the actual development, or just in general, like do I talk to people to learn things, or like? Like
when you're producing a game and you have to communicate to like artists and the like how much cross discipline collaboration do you have? Like did you have to do some art at some point, or?
Some of my older games I did do some art. I'm not an artist by any means, but it was just because I didn't have any resources to do it. Like I would. Like I have a little bit of Photoshop knowledge, so I can do some stuff like main menus and things like that, and I found some free resources online for like 3D models and stuff. But for our last two games, I've worked very closely with my friend Gonzalo Antunes. He does all of the art. I just let him do it because he's good. And there's a lot of back and forth. You know, I have a specific idea, okay, this scene needs to express this feeling. So there's a lot of back and forth, like, okay, for the background environments, we need this idea to come across. How do you think that would work? I try to leave it open for him a little bit because I don't want to feel like he's being whipped to do a specific thing. Like, I want him to put his creative thoughts into it as well, you know? So there's a little bit of like, hey, I like this idea to come across, and then I let him have freedom. But the other thing I find is that sometimes there's design issues that arise from how art is, and like, I guess a good example would be in platformers, you want the background to be not looking like something you can jump on, like you need it to be distilled or grayscale, or you can approach it different ways, but if it looks like players can jump on it, that's a design issue, but it's not something I can fix. I have to collaborate with the artists to go back and forth. Hopefully that makes sense, right? Like, yeah, it goes back and forth quite a bit.
So it helps to speak multiple languages, basically,
yes,
as far as cross-disciplinary
for sure, yeah.
tools. Okay, and what would you have wanted to know early in your career? Like if you were to go back to like say 10 years ago, like let your old self know what to expect. Like what would it be? I
think it's funny because I was saying this type of stuff back then, but I didn't actually practice what I was preaching, and that was I think you should do very small games and try to keep the scope down, especially when you're early on, because I feel like you're just learning, and those first 5 or 6 games are just learning experiences, I feel like, and I've always had the endeavor or the ambition, I want to do this full-on masterpiece, you know, so I obsess over everything, and that's why my last game took 3 years, and I look back and it's like, well, maybe it shouldn't have taken that long, because I could have done some other games in that time too, you know, and I knew this stuff back then, but you get so passionate and excited about what you're working on, you just want to be the best it can be, and then that just snowballs over time, you know. So I think a lot of my mistake maybe was just, you know, early on I was doing 3D games, and I came to the conclusion that I need to be doing 2D because we're only 2 people, and that's, you know, I think we can play, 2D is a bigger strength because we can do unique things in 2D that stand out from AAA. But then what I didn't think of was we're still making games that have huge scope in terms of art assets. So what I mean by that is in the Path of Modus, there's 3 different chapters, but each one of them is totally different in terms of art. So that's a lot of extra time for production, right? And you know, if I can pick a project that's not so art intensive, but it's still something that you know is important to me, that would help, right? Keep the art stuff low, keep the audio assets low. That would help me decrease the development time, I think. So I would have given myself that talk back then, you know. So
as far as like titles go, if you were to call yourself like like a game designer, producer? Like, would you consider yourself like a writer, director, musician, all the above? Like what? Like how many hats do you consider yourself to be like capable of wearing?
Well, I mean, it's hard because this depends on what I'm doing for the day. Some days I wake up and I say I'm a game designer. Other days I'm a programmer working on engine back-end stuff that no one really sees, you know. And like I mentioned earlier, I do PR and marketing, and I do consider myself a writer, but like I said, maybe not in the sense of like a traditional story, but my games are all about like the ideas and the message and stuff. So I write, I feel like I'm a writer. I do the music and all that. I don't know, I just, depends what day. but also at the same time, that's cool because if I start to get burnt out on one thing, I can say, okay, enough of the programming, let's do some music today, and it feels nice to just switch and think of myself differently. But if I was, usually when I talk to people, you know, I'm introducing myself, I just say I'm a game designer and musician, because I feel like that's the biggest chunk of what I do, I guess. So, yeah.
So you're dug in like two specialties quite well, and you're like familiar, you're capable of delivering everything else around it.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah. Like when did you feel like you'd like made it? You're like, this is it. I've achieved my goal. I am like comfortable saying I'm like super legit in my industry. You know, like
I still don't feel that way.
still-
I mean, I don't know. When Pillar came out, it was cool because like I'm not sure if I mentioned this in this video, I think I talked about earlier, but we had like some cool coverage. Like I was interviewed for Game Informer magazine, and we were like one of 4 games. It was like a big feature about like innovation in the industry and stuff. And that felt like validating. And there's been some other things, like I was interviewed in Wired, and like whenever you do those big publication things, it makes you feel like you're legit or you've made it or whatever. But that's not really why I do it though. Like I do it because I want people to connect with what I do. And whenever that happens, that's when I feel like everything's been worth it. Like if I see people write like a analysis of this is what the game meant to me, or I had a lot of fun playing it, whatever it is, that makes me feel more legit, I guess, because the proof is in the pudding, and that's the proof, right? When people are actually connecting with it at that level. So.
Okay, and it's like what do you like? What would you have to say to like somebody who's maybe at a crossroads in their life and is not quite sure if like their chosen career path is like for them? Like, is it like basically okay to jump around and like be okay with not figuring stuff out so soon? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, I knew pretty early on, like when I released my first Xbox game, I at that moment realized that this could be like a career thing for me. But before that, I really had no idea what I was doing. And maybe I kind of lucked into that. I was just at the right place at the right time because the indie thing was just, I was at kind of the beginning of the big indie bubble or whatever you want to call it. But I feel like a lot of people in their 20s still don't really know what they want to do. I mean, I was just lucky to kind of stumble into that when I was like 18, 19. But yeah, I mean, it's totally okay to figure out, I think it's important that you understand, you know yourself well enough to say, hey, this is what I want to do. Because like your career, you're going to do that every single day of your life, right? Most of your life is going to be doing your job, and you want to be sure you know yourself enough and have contemplated on it enough to know that, yes, this is what I want to do, this is what I want to put all of my eggs into, or whatever the metaphor is, right? So I think don't feel like you have to rush into anything. Take your time, make sure it's the right thing, and it's what you're going to be happy doing. You know, and I know like you have to have money to eat, but I see a lot of people in the industry, they go for the high-paying job, and I see a lot of people leave AAA because it's good money, but it's not exactly what they're happy doing because they have this specific idea they want to do. You know, maybe it just takes working some other jobs to really wash away all of the noise and see what you really want to do. So yeah, it's fine to take time.
So how do you feel yourself? Like what are you going to do to ensure that you stay on like the cutting edge of the industry? Like what do you think? Where do you think the industry is going from here on out? Is there something you want to be a part of or any of that?
Yeah, I mean, like my interest in game design, and like I feel like not a lot of designers are trying to make games like I am. I was inspired by a lot of people that were, but even my heroes, like they're not even making games like that anymore, and I feel like I'm kind of the only ones trying to push. I'm sure it's not true, but you don't hear about these types of, like back when I started doing this, there's always talks about the potential of video games, and like games can convey things in a unique way, and we have all this potential, let's do it type of thing. And maybe you still see talks like that now, but it seems like there's not many people actually trying to do it and experimenting, and that's where I feel like I'm contributing because I have the freedom to do that as an indie. Sure, maybe I fail, but I feel like my work is helping others that in the future maybe try to do this type of stuff. So, that's the main reason I'm still indie, is I'm interested in trying to communicate things in a way that's unique to games and pushing design forward. I'm not sure if I'm doing that, but it feels good to at least know I'm trying, right? So, yeah, hopefully I can still stay on that front and be cutting edge in that way, I guess, yeah.
So what's next for you? Like, what's on the slate?
I have some ideas for some games I'd like to do, and I think I'm going to do a small, just funny game, like a satire game, and I'm not going to think too much about it, just kind of throw it up as a joke, and if people like it, okay, but I just need a little bit of a break from the serious development, and I feel like my games are funny, there's a little bit subtle humor in them, but it would feel nice to get away from the deep thinking, all that, and just make something funny and throw it up and have a good time, and then that would be my working vacation. I can come back and try to do a little more serious project. So I think that's what I'm going to do now. Do a little short funny project and then come back and do another, hopefully not 3-year project, but maybe a year project. So.
All right. Well, thanks for your time. Best of luck in
Thank you for having
all
me.
your games. Thank you.
You.